And we are live. Welcome back, beautiful ladies. Dorothy, it's so good to have you today.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're
It's so
welcome.
good to be with my ladies again.
Yay!
I almost felt like we were had like a major break.
So, in this moment, well, first I'll say, guys, welcome back to Enlightened Health and Healing, where we're bringing forward conversations about physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health forward so that you can learn all of the knowledge we have and the experiences we have to, in some way, whatever that looks like for you, to use that information however that you need. And on that note, we're so excited to have Dorothy O'Dell with us today back. And circling back, Dorothy, to what you were saying, I have to say, we got to have you here more often because we love your energy. I love your energy. I can't speak for Doc, but
I agree. I love your energy as well.
So we love having you here, and we've missed you.
Well, I've missed you, ladies. And Christy, I actually talked about you on Monday night because we were doing a Would You Rather, and Brian Schulman is just like you. And I said, oh my gosh, it's like playing Would You Rather with Dr. Christy.
He had too many questions and had refused to answer certain things.
Yes.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean,
avoidance.
Questions are complicated. I mean, they require thought.
I had a major headache by the end of that show. But it was all good. I loved it.
Well, good to have you back here, Dorothy.
Well, thank you.
And sorry we missed your fun show. I missed your fun show.
That's okay. We're going to do it again.
Yes, let's get a date. Okay, we're talking about grief. And guys, before I took some notes just so that I could keep myself on track of some thoughts that I had on the topic of grief. And Dorothy, I know that this one's really close to you and your heart. And as I look to the definition of grief, it's really defined as deep sorrow or trouble or annoyance with something we have going on with life. And I just wanted to start there because I think that sometimes I was having a conversation earlier with a client and they're really going through the grief process. They've had a pretty major breakup. And sometimes I think we lose sight of the grief that we can feel in normal everyday life. Not to mention the major impact, Dorothy, like yourself, unfortunately had with your dad a couple weeks back of losing a loved one.
It's funny when you said deep sorrow, because when I was talking to Dr. Christy, what was it, Monday or something like that, and she said she feels deep sadness, and the sorrow is correct. I mean, like when you lose somebody that was your rock for 45 years, you're going to feel something. Although I will have to say that each stage of grief is different, and I don't think I'm out of my numbness yet, to be quite frank and quite honest, because grief hits in different moments. And when you said that you were talking to somebody who was going through a breakup, and I can remember when I was going through a major breakup, and the grief is different from that than what I feel now. Yes, I was, from the breakup, it was like, well, to be honest, I used alcohol to cope with that. And I did get drunk one night, and that was the end of it. And then the next day I woke up and I thought, okay, well, life goes on. And that was 11 years ago. And this grief is different because it's to watch somebody suffer is like a relief in one sense that their suffering is no longer. But then when you realize what really sucks is now you have to live the rest of your life without them.
Yeah.
So it's different in both scenarios. So
you talked about the stages of grief. I know that when my dad passed, and prior to my dad passing, we lost one of my brothers. And quite frankly, Dorothy, I stepped into the strong, okay, I have to be strong for everyone role. Yep. And being very frank, I can't tell you that I actually learned how to grieve until I lost my Brock, our dog, who was 13 years old about a year ago. And I can tell you it wasn't until then that I even really fully grieved in the process with my dad.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sometimes so speeding that up, how do we look back and say, wow, in those moments when we do numb ourselves or we do shut it off, how can we heal sooner, essentially?
I definitely think allowing yourself those moments when they do come, and they will come. I was at the kitchen sink on Saturday or Sunday, I forget what it was, and just doing normal thing, and then it hit me. He's not walking through the door anymore. And oh my God, I'm never going to see him again. And then I got very upset. Like, I was crying, obviously, and my husband was home and he saw that I was emotional. So he's like, well, what's going on? So I just told him, it's just overwhelming right now. And he lost his dad 6 years ago. So he knows what it's like. So, he just hugged me and we sat there until the moment passed. And for me, the moment, it doesn't stay forever right now anyways. Thank goodness. The longest it's lasted has been a couple minutes for right now. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to hit me, because I lost my grandfather 19 years ago, and who was also an amazing man. And that was my dad's dad. And I had a really good relationship with him. And it didn't even hit me until 5 or 6 years later, and it was at Christmas time that it hit me, and I was bawling like uncontrollably, and my parents are like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, I just feel the loss really bad right now. And I think we have to be aware of the holidays suck for a lot of people, especially Christmas time, for different reasons, like either they're losing a loved one or homelessness or different things that go on. And in those moments is when the old memories come back. So just being aware of when your triggers are, and if you can have somebody around you that will help you through those moments, and talking it out. I think talking it out, well, for me, helps anyways. I'm a verbal processor, so that's what happens for me.
Yeah, that's a really good mention that I want to come back to. But first, I want to give Christy, do you have any thoughts thus far?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm having issues because my computer is not really behaving. So every now and then it cuts out, and so I only hear half of what you guys say. So I might try to just go back off on my phone and come back in. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I may have to try that halfway through.
It's possible. We'll make it happen.
Okay. So if you see me disappear, that's what I'm doing.
Got it.
But in the meantime, what I was just going to share is, I mean, thankfully, from my own standpoint, I've never lost someone as close as a parent. I've had a handful of other losses, and I recently actually known her in grade school. Oh, am I back?
You're back.
Okay. One of my friends from grade school that I've even known just lost her mom. And it's as things move forward, it's getting to a very different stage in life where I'm seeing that grieving process very differently than I ever have. And to both of your points already, there's no wrong way to grieve. It comes in waves. Sometimes it hits you, sometimes it doesn't. And in Dorothy, especially that remedy that again, I saw you guys freeze. Hello, am I back?
You're back.
You're back.
I can see when it happens because you guys freeze. The remedy that I mentioned to you is sometimes helpful for managing that roller coaster of emotions. Because even though we can't bring that person back, we can't make anything like better, so to speak, but it helps our bodies physiologically kind of manage that up and down from time to time.
Yeah. So there's a couple points in both of what you just said. First, I want to touch on how each of us process differently. And in addition, I'm going to mention both, and we can come back to both. The first is just the allowing of grief. And I do want to come back to when grief shows up, that's not in physical loss of a person. But first, when we talk about how we all process differently, so let's stay on that one first, and then we can come back to the allowance of the emotions to happen. So I can tell you, processing wise, for me, it can come very differently depending on the circumstances. For me, when I finally processed both my dad and Brock, and I would assert that I also processed grief of my brother in that point, I literally shelled. And I can tell you that it really drove someone crazy that I didn't open up and wasn't more open. But for me, that's the way I needed to cry it out, and I needed to allow the feelings to come. And for me, there are some times that I internally process. I go inside, I look, I question, I ask. And yet there are other times when I'm ready on my terms, then I'm ready to talk. So I would say that I have both. I process both internally, and then when I process internally, then I bring it out once I'm ready on my terms.
I
I have one
totally
more quick
love
thing.
that.
One more quick thing. My point in all that is honor who you are and where you're at. Go ahead, Dorothy.
I was just going to say, essentially I'm the same way, because there's a lot of, I go quiet and I go deep and I go, half the time people don't even realize that I'm maybe grieving, or sometimes I can't even tell you what I'm doing. I just know that it's different. And so I have a tendency, like you, when things happen, I go into mode where I take charge. Everything's ready. My dad was that way. Once everything's ready, once all the life insurance is taken care of, once mom's done, then I'll have my chance to have my break. But or process it even more. But like you, I go into that mode, and then that's when I'm silent. And that's how I process. But then there are moments that it just hits you, like you said, and yeah.
Well, and within all that is the allowance of letting it come. Well, it's twofold for me, in my opinion. It's number one, not making yourself wrong or bad in any of it. If you want to be the person that just needs a day to lay on the couch and cry it out, lay on the couch and cry it out. And just get to the point of overcoming it. But allowing those feelings and not making those feelings wrong. I can tell you, for me, part of mine was I grew up with the suck it up mentality. You just keep on going. You don't deal with the feelings, and just shove them away. Mm-hmm. And that, honestly, it's built a lot of grit and perseverance in me. So I love that piece of me. And now that I have the understanding of learning and knowing and being with feelings, it's a whole nother perspective, because when you have both, that's life-changing. Kirsty, what do you think?
So I'm trying to catch up here because I was doing a dance of screens. I think it worked out though. Yeah, for me, I'm an external processor for the most part. When it comes to grief, it's kind of a whole different ballgame. And any grief that I've ever had in the past, it's like, I don't know, there's no predictable way for me. And so it's not like I know that I'm going to do this first and then I'm going to go through this stage next. And I mean, like you mentioned, the stages, I don't think the stages are linear.
Agreed.
I think they're all over the map. And not only is it different for each person, it's different by day, it's different by week. And obviously, as time moves forward, I think it tends to get a little bit easier. And like Dorothy, like you said, it could be 5 years later that still something hits you out of nowhere. And that's kind of the unpredictable nature of it. And I think the most important part is, like we've said already, like not to judge that process and give ourselves grace in those moments, to know that it's completely and totally normal, whether it's been 5 hours since you've lost someone, or 5 years, or 5 decades. It sometimes just happens, and allow those feelings to come when they do.
Yeah. So with all that, how do we, both for, of course, ourselves, and more so even for everybody watching, how do we support ourselves in that process? How do we deal with the grief to support ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually in that? Well, I'm going to back that out. I apologize. First, can we talk about other ways we might see grief? Because that's relevant once we talk about how we manage it. So other times that we can see grief in life. What are both of your perspectives?
First, before I answer that, I want to say hi to Tim. So he's on Facebook messaging us.
Tim.
So say Yay. Hi. What was your specific question?
Specific question is, other times we can at times see grief in life, which the reason I say that is I don't think people identify it as grief.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're in this emotional roller coaster, in this emotional tornado. And when we sometimes can look in and we can say, oh, that's grief, but they don't necessarily recognize it as grief. They may assign a different meaning to it.
Yeah, I agree completely on that. Sometimes, semantically speaking, I can see viewing it as a loss. Like certain things I can see as interpreting as a loss in my life that then requires grieving, but without that transitional word, I guess, so to speak, I would never have seen certain stressors in life as grief based.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. Like, just even like in a change of a relationship or some news that, you know, shifts something in general. It's like, okay, I'm now grieving the loss of what I used to know to be true. And now I have to change my perspective or whatever it might end up being.
Yeah.
That's kind of my initial thought on it. And I might have a small human that might be interrupting our call. I just heard footsteps, just FYI.
We love the company. Lighten up the conversation. Dorothy, what
Also
do
true.
you think on that one?
I think in some instances, like I was thinking, my brain went to where else have I felt grief before? Definitely losing a job that you really liked. Or for me, the several businesses that I were involved in that went belly up. And grieving that process, you know, because for me, it was, you know, like, what did I do? How did I mess that up? Or things like that. And it's still a grieving process because you grieve. It's just different. And, you know, you still feel the emotions and you still feel like the anger and the doubt and everything like that. You know, just those are just some instances that came to mind when you were asking about different circumstances.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those. And I would add for me, if I look back to my life timeline, I would say that I've experienced grief even in major emotional turmoil. Like when I've had a major emotional stress, I would tell you when I had cancer, I went through a major grief.
Oh, yeah.
And that wasn't a loss. It was a major emotional hiccup, I guess you could say. Just a hiccup of life. Just a minor road
Just a
bump.
little bit.
Time. No big deal. We got through it. So, okay. So then moving that forward, how do we deal with it? How do we both on the front end identify it? So that's number one, is identifying the grief that we're experiencing. And number two, then what do we do on the back end to allow and support ourselves in the meantime?
For me, once again, that goes back to individuality of what each person needs in each individual moment. For me, when those things would come up, I think depending on the circumstances, of course, one of my first things would be to reach out to friends and close loved ones that, you know, are there. We always have people that are supportive of us, I would assume and hope. That would be my first thing. And if we're more of an internal processor, or if that moment requires more of internal processing, there's different ways that we've mentioned before, you know, to journal or take a walk, or if you're religious, pray or meditate, whatever helps connect you to what you need in that moment. And that's just a lot of self-reflection to figure out what's best for you at that time.
Yeah, I definitely think that in all conversations, everything's person specific, because what works for one is not always the same for what works for another.
Yeah.
Dorothy, what do you think?
First thing, because sometimes we might not even identify what's going on, but if you sit back and look and, you know, okay, why was I angry today? Why did I snap at this person? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And because sometimes it could be out of the ordinary of what you're doing. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, I must be feeling something because I'm not acting like I normally would. Like for myself, I don't know why, but the first thing I turn to is anger. I get really angry and snappy. So then I look at, okay, why am I this way? Or I go the opposite and I go really quiet. So it's either or, one or the other, and there's really not a happy middle ground.
No.
I've noticed in my 45 years. However, I've gotten a lot closer to hurry up identifying that so that I could get myself out of that. And to get myself out of that, I usually, like Chrissy said, talk to somebody about it. A really good friend, one who I know is not going to judge. And you two are definitely my first go-tos on those now that my dad's not here. And definitely journaling is another good thing. Writing that person a letter really helps. Great advice that I got from Dr. Christie a couple weeks ago. Anyways,
love you.
Yeah, I love you too. And and that's why, surrounding yourself with those people that are going to bring you up and not just tear you down. Like if, for instance, I have this friend, and I'm friends with the husband. I've known the husband before I met the wife, and the husband's like a brother to me. So every marriage goes through its ups and downs, totally. But when somebody started putting him down, I was like, oh, but wait a minute, and started putting the positive spin on it. And she thanked me later and said, you know what? If I would have talked to any of my other friends, they would have just allowed me to continue. But, I appreciate the fact that you stopped it and that you rerouted and redirected that conversation. Because yes, we could all go down that rabbit hole, and we've all gone down that rabbit hole with our spouse. Don't get me wrong. But it takes that person to stop and say, why are you shit stacking? And, and redirect it and bring it back around. So definitely surrounding yourself with those people that are going to not allow you to stay where you're at in those tough moments and in those situations.
Yeah, both of you said so many good nuggets, and I agree with all of it. And to add a couple things. Dorothy, to the point you just mentioned, I think it's both. I think it's someone who's not going to let you stay there, but someone who's just going to let you get it out. Because I think that there's a normal amount of processing time that someone just needs to be able to be in their full self-expression, screaming and getting it all out.
Totally.
I often tell it. I tell everybody, I don't care how it comes. Give it all to me. Like, let me have it. I don't care if you're yelling at me. I don't care whatever. Because sometimes in that just not having to be delicate with the person you're talking to, you actually get the emotion out behind the words. Because otherwise you're just dancing around the words and the emotions are still sitting with you and you're still pissed and you're still feeling a certain way. Okay. But I can tell you, I've had clients just yelling at me about how they feel. I'm like, keep going. Let's get it all out because you literally get those emotions out, right? And then to your point, it's not letting them stay there after they get it all out. But it's been my experience that generally, for me anyway, if someone goes through that front end that way, they essentially know their answer at the end. Because oftentimes, if someone can truly just be themselves and get everything out, at the end of it, it's like, shit, now I see it. Now I know what I need to do. And we generally don't have to have our hand down the tornado unless they're just in a really dark spot that they can't see the light, which happens.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that really comes to my mind when I look at, again, the healthy ways of dealing with grief is just being kind to yourself in the process. And for me, as I look and close my eyes, I just say, what do I need in this moment? And sometimes we might not know that answer. But even to continue to ask, like, what do I need in this moment? And also, as I'm saying that out loud, backing out of the situation and looking in, especially when it's not loss of a person, I think that that's a different type of look. But when it's grief in other ways, I think it's stepping back and looking in on the situation to say, am I seeing this all the way through? Is there something I'm missing? When it's the right time, what is the good that can come of whatever this hard thing really was? And what is the light at the end? And I think asking those questions can, again, then help at least me to decipher how I need to process the emotions.
Yeah. I love that, Jen. And one thing that came to me as you were saying that is, to me, at least, that's why having conversations with other people is so important to me, because I feel like in those moments, A, I don't sometimes know what I need. And B, I can't see my own blind spots.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all have moments where we're so wrapped up in whatever is happening that we miss certain aspects of things, a corollary to something else that's going on in your life, or another connection that we just missed because we're too wrapped up in it. And then somebody else's perspective can have that groundedness to bring the awareness to you so that you can help process it more further.
Yeah. Well, and in the emotional heightenedness to that point, when we get emotionally heightened, we don't necessarily act in the same way that we would if we weren't emotionally heightened.
I've never been emotionally heightened. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know you never have. You're an anomaly of life. You're the only person on the planet who's never been emotionally heightened.
And I was going to say
maybe just in the last hour.
And I like Dorothy's answer better.
What did she say? I missed it.
Say it again, Dorothy.
Bullshit.
Oh. Well done.
Okay, so natural ways to ease the burden on our bodies when we're dealing with emotion. Let's talk about that. So, of course, for me, it's keeping the basics in check. The basics of what we'd always do: food, water, nutrition, getting outside, all of those pieces. But Chrissy, can you speak to a couple of the things that you recommend to someone when they're going through grief, whether it be a loss of someone or even on the emotional spectrum of other areas of grief?
Yeah. So the one main thing that I go to, it's a homeopathic remedy called Ignatia, IGN. I can actually put it in the chat, at least on Facebook, since I've got it open. Homeopathy, for those of anybody watching who doesn't know what homeopathy is based on the premise that like cures like. And so if we were in nature and we were to take some venom from a snake, for instance, we take that venom from a snake and then dilute a drop of it in some water. And then we take a drop of that already diluted amount and dilute it again. And then take a drop of that dilution and dilute it again, and literally go through that process like 100 or more times. And then ultimately, at the end of that, what you're left with is the energetic frequency blueprint of that initial substance. There's no traceable amount of that original venom in the end product, but what's left is just that energetic blueprint, so that when you ingest it at that point, your body can create a response to it in a positive way from an energetic standpoint. So it's kind of hard to understand, and the more diluted something becomes, the more potent it actually is. And so in homeopathy, there's different potencies that you can get of different products. They're listed numerically speaking. So there's a 6C, for instance, there's a 30C, which is the most commonly prescribed just in acute situations. Then you can go up to 200C, 1M, and 10M, get very potent. And so when I am working with someone who's experienced a loss or grief, Ignatia Amara 30C is one of my most recommended remedies from the standpoint, because I actually don't remember if Ignatia is a flower or what it is in nature, but if you were to ingest that in its whole form, in its raw, place, you'd feel a lot of sadness and strain up and down in your body. They refer to it in homeopathic circles as the funeral remedy, because when we're at a funeral, one moment you're laughing, the next minute you're crying and sobbing. And it's just that dichotomy of emotions. And like I said before, when I was mentioning it earlier, without getting specific, it's not going to bring the person back. It's not going to eliminate the sadness or the grief from your heart. It's just going to help your body feel a little bit more stable through the process. And you're still going to have to go through whatever processing each person individually goes through. But from the body physiological standpoint, that's one of my favorite remedies. And it's usually pretty impactful for people, that they just feel like a little less stressed, a little bit less on edge, and that they can get through it on their own way.
Are there any other remedies or go-tos that you recommend?
I mean, that's the biggest one specific to grief. The other ones that I recommend, you guys probably both know, there's something that I use in my office from NET Remedies called ER911. That's another homeopathic blend that helps and supports people in stress, depending on whatever could be going on. Or if you don't have that, Jen's left. And if you don't have that, she's going to go grab it. Nice call. Mine's all the way on the other side of the room. And if you don't have that, the flower essence version of that is something really easily findable called Rescue Remedy from Bach Flower Essences.
Good.
So just little nuggets and tidbits to help support your body through it. Because like you said, all the basics, all the foundations of water intake, food, exercise, just doing normal things to keep your body and mind and nervous system going. And sometimes it just needs a little help to get back online when those things aren't enough.
Right. And what I said in the very, very beginning, it's honoring your feelings. It's honoring what your body's going through and allowing the emotions to be there and allowing them to come out, not staying there, but allowing them to be present to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so before I move on to the next question that I had, any other tips thus far on grief, how to manage it, steps to walk through, going once?
I would say, like, everybody says go take a hot bath. everybody has said that to me, and for some people that could work. For me, I go to water, like not necessarily having a bath or a shower, but for me the water is calming, so I'll go for a walk down by the riverfront or take off and disappear, and that's where I go. But even reading a book has been beneficial for me the last couple weeks as well. Reading something that I like, not business minded. And the hardest part, not the hardest part of the last 3 weeks, that's not, the allowing myself not to get caught up in what I should be doing. For instance, so for 3 weeks, I have yet to do anything with my business except the very basics and getting my show. And that would have, there are some times that it drives me crazy, but then I'm also allowing God to talk to me and saying, no, take the rest of the week. Tomorrow, Saturday is my dad's celebration of life. So I've been trying to get, working on that, getting things that I want to say down on paper. So I've allowed myself that time that I needed instead of forcing myself to do things that I know I should be doing, which I've never done before either. So, yeah.
Well, that's a really good point, Dorothy, because you can't really assign a timeline behind how long it takes to grieve.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny because no matter what you listen to, like I've been listening to Real Talk Kim. It's funny. I started listening to her around December 8th, which is around the time that my dad was last diagnosed with cancer. And I'm like, there's a reason why things have been happening since December 8th. And I can pinpoint it now, including meeting you ladies and then being brought into the Saturday morning group and things like that. It's to get me to, because God was preparing me because I knew this time was coming. I really did. I chose that I wasn't going to believe it. I chose to look that that we would have more time with him instead of what my gut was telling me and all the signs that I saw. And, but no, like I've been being prepared for this moment now for almost 10 months now. So yeah, it's just allowing yourself to go through those moments and, and taking that time. That's what I was going through. Real Talk Kim lost her dad. And she said, she had bad days, but it's just getting up and trying to do the everyday things that helps you get through it. Like allow yourself, but then don't stay stuck in that grieving process is what I think. But, and then I have some other people say to me, well, put everything into perspective and there's only 2 guarantees in life, death and taxes. Everybody has an opinion.
Everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
It's true.
Can I add something? So, Dorothy, on what you were saying, I really truly have a question on this, as I don't know the answer, or if there is even an answer. When I recommend with patients or people, on methods of meditation and like being mindful in their own space, independent of the grief process, just in general, I often recommend like really truly being present with whatever's going on to process through it completely, as opposed to getting on your phone or watching TV or even reading a book, because those things can be an escape. But when you were saying that, Dorothy, you mentioned just reading a book. And I'm really curious, and I believe this to be true, that I think sometimes a distraction is what we need to just break a pattern and not think about something. When's the right moment for that? Like, when's the right moment for distraction and just getting your mind off of something versus moving through it?
Okay, so with that being said, I'll be completely honest, and I've been in avoidance mode. I have not done my normal routine, and which was the 15 minutes of silence and meditating and trying to hear God's voice. I have avoided that for the last 3 weeks, maybe longer. And I have avoided, that doesn't mean that I don't pray still. And like today when we were praying before we started this, I was praying, Jen was just speaking over the group what we were going to do, and I felt God's presence, and I felt I call it the Holy Spirit. I felt that through my body. So I do feel that, but I have yet to take the time. I've tried a couple times to journal out my gratitude and things like that. Every morning I will speak out my gratitude, but I'm having a hard time sitting, focusing, and concentrating and writing it out. I'm having a very hard time, to be honest.
So I would say we were setting a positive intent and praying over the show, just to set that clear.
Yeah.
And how can we support you with that, Dorothy? How can we support you where you're at currently? Because I can tell you and commit to you that it's going to help anyone watching that's in the same stage you are, no matter what their no matter what their grief phase is.
And that's the thing, I'm not sure.
Okay.
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure. Because to me, meditation and that is something that you do yourself. But again, I could be wrong. I don't know. Just being perfectly honest.
Perhaps right now, just if I could offer, perhaps right now it's just allowance and just being okay with where you're at. And it's not pushing anything. And it's just allowing to say, you know what? I'm out of sorts. I'm not ready to go to God yet. I'm not ready. And when I am, I will. And it's just being okay with, here's where I'm at. I'm going to be gentle with myself. I'm going to be kind to myself. And I'm going to know and commit to myself that I'm not going to stay here. And I'm going to keep looking and asking to say, is it time for me to take a step? Because you're the best person who knows when that is. I really, when my dad died, there were people over and over again that told my mom, you should just move on. And they defining timelines of grief. And I don't believe that there's any defined timeline. And I think it's different for every single person.
Yeah.
And I think just continuing to look for what can bring you solace and what is right for you. Because I think in that moment, we all respond differently. And some of it can be anger. Some of it, I can tell you, some can be anger with why things happen or who's to fault or whatever, which could in turn be impacting you.
I think, I mean, I still pray, but I don't do it the way that I used to. And I have given gratitude every day and trying to find the good things, but I don't journal it like I was doing before. And I tried to, there's this lady that was on my show a couple weeks ago that has this, she starts this prayer thing at 4:00 in the morning. I'm like, well, how perfect is that? I'm up at 4:00 doing my meditation. I'll just join this. So I joined it for one day and I'm like, okay, I like this, but then I didn't continue with it. And so it's just, I guess, and before I would force myself to continue to get up at 4, but my sleeping patterns are all over the place. And sometimes I sleep, sometimes I don't, and sometimes it's broken. So I've allowed myself this past week to not get up at 4 and force myself to do what I was normally doing, allowing myself to try and get the extra sleep and just trying to find out what my new normal is, because I really don't know what my new normal is right now.
And I think that that's exactly, for me at least, telling of you're exactly where you're meant to be right now.
Yep.
The other thing that I'm going to add to something Christy mentioned earlier is, for me, when I finally learned how to grieve last year when we lost Brock, I can tell you I got lost in movies. And me getting lost in movies, it wasn't disconnecting. It was very cathartic. It actually stimulated for me, and it was definitely the right type of movies. It stimulated me leaning into that grief process. And it actually allowed me to release even more.
That's funny you said that because, okay, I haven't done this since I was a teenager. I used to pick one day a month and just stay in bed and watch movies all day. Of course, it was chick flicks back then, and that's what I liked. And I haven't done that since I was a teenager, and it just came up out of the blue last week. I'm like, I would give anything to just stay in bed all day and watch movies, but that's not who I am now. And I don't even, like I said, I'm 45. I don't know when the last time I've done that was, and I'm like, damn, that just sounds so good not to do anything.
Maybe that's exactly what you need.
Maybe.
Just a thought.
Maybe
So maybe
Sunday.
not all day. Start with one and see how it goes and see what drives you after that.
Yeah. All right, ladies, we're past our 30 minutes, and I want to be responsible of everyone's times. This was a beautiful conversation and fast. And I did have more that I actually want to do a follow-up show if you're both okay with it, because I think that there's a whole nother dynamic of grief that comes in the form of COVID and masks and schools and kids. And it's not one that we can touch on quickly. So if you're both in for a follow-up show to this show next month, I'd like to touch on grief as it relates to what people are currently experiencing with COVID and everything around COVID. Are you in?
I'm in.
Great. Okay. Any final words, tips, advice for anyone experiencing grief, going through grief?
Just allow yourself to be in those moments and allow it to come, and reach out to people that you know have your back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christy, any?
What we've all said already. Hang in there, stay the course, and there are people that care and will support you through it all.
Yeah. And friends, I'm going to tell you what I have come to find that I end a lot of shows with, and that is this: as always, be kind to yourself. And fact is, especially with grief, depending on where you're at in life, it could pull you down in a really tough moment. And if you ever find yourself in that moment, reach out, get help, dial the hotline, call one of us. You're not in it alone, to both what Christy and Dorothy had said. And reach out to who you need to, so that if you can't see the light right now, you can find someone to help you see the light until you have that bearing to be back on your own 2 feet. And with that, we love you all. And thank you for, whether you're catching this live or whether you're catching this on the replay, thank you for being here. And we will be back here next week, normal time, Friday at 10 a.m. Topic to be determined, because we haven't assigned it yet.
We totally didn't. You're right.
So more to come on that. We love you, friends. And
It's great. It'll just create the suspense for next week.
Yay! All right. Bye, guys.